Beneath the smoke of a war the world thought it understood, shadows moved in locked rooms and sealed vaults. Files vanished, witnesses disappeared, and whispers of machines no one dared name bled into classified margins. What remains is a trail of redacted pages and empty graves, evidence buried so deep it rots in the dark, waiting for the moment someone pries the lid open and stares into what was never meant to be seen. On May 8, 1945, as Europe marked the official end of the Second World War, the Admiralty in London received a set of fragmented Enigma decrypts from Bletchley Park. The transmissions, captured 2 days earlier from a Kriegsmarine frequency, referenced an unverified program known only as Projekt Sturmlicht, and made repeated mention of Gotenhafen, a major German naval port on the Baltic coast. The content was puzzling. The war was effectively over, yet the Germans appeared to be moving materials inland under heavy guard. Initial analysis suggested the transmissions were part of a last-minute effort to conceal either advanced weapons technology or sensitive archives. Photo reconnaissance from late April had revealed unusual construction activity near the port, a network of ventilation shafts cut into the cliffs, guarded by anti-aircraft batteries long after surrounding defenses had collapsed. Intelligence officers hypothesized that the site could house the remnants of an experimental program related to long-range V weapons. In January 1946, under the cloak of demobilization, the Admiralty authorized Operation Beaconfall, a covert salvage mission to locate and assess the Gotenhafen facility. The assignment was given to HMS Kestrel, a modified river-class frigate with a complement of 85 officers and crew, many of whom had served in convoy escort duty in the North Atlantic. The Kestrel's captain, Commander Adrian Weatherby, had a background in naval intelligence and had previously been involved in post-war wreck surveys off Norway. The mission orders, declassified in part in 1983, outlined a 3-stage operation. 1. Proceed under cover of night into the waters off Bornholm Island. 2. Conduct diver reconnaissance of the suspected facility, identified on naval charts as Sector 42/Red. 3. If the site proved intact, prepare for extraction of any materials before Soviet forces consolidated control of the area. Departing Portsmouth on January 17, 1946, the Kestrel made her way through the Skagerrak, entering the Baltic under the pretext of post-war minesweeping. The final entry in her official ship's log, dated January 21, records sighting the lighthouse at Kristiansø. Civilian fishing vessels later reported seeing her in the early morning haze, engines idling, with several crew on deck wearing immersion suits. The disappearance itself is reconstructed from a combination of surviving radio traffic and testimony from Baltic trawler crews. At 4:18 hours, the Kestrel transmitted a terse, coded burst to Admiralty Signals Command. Beaconfall Phase 2 initiated. Divers in water. Shore access confirmed. Less than an hour later, a second transmission, partially garbled, reached Portsmouth. Structure extends below, multiple chambers, presence of, the rest of the message was lost to static. No further contact was received. By 12 o'clock hours, Polish coastal observers reported sighting an unpowered vessel matching the Kestrel's silhouette adrift 10 nautical miles northeast of Bornholm. A Soviet minesweeper, T-351, claimed salvage rights and towed her toward Kołobrzeg. When Royal Navy officers arrived to inspect her days later, they found the frigate eerily empty. Personal effects were scattered in cabins. A mid-watch tea mug still sat on the chart table. The radio was frozen in transmission mode, microphone dangling, as if someone had been cut off mid-sentence. The logbooks for the final 2 days were missing, their binding cords cleanly sliced. The Soviets refused to release photographs of the ship's interior, citing security reasons. British naval intelligence officers noted sealed hatches below the waterline that had been forced open prior to their arrival. The ship's diving gear inventory showed 4 sets unaccounted for. There were no signs of combat, no shell impacts, no blast damage. An internal Admiralty inquiry in February 1946 concluded loss of crew due to operational mishap during hazardous reconnaissance in hostile waters, though this explanation was quietly dismissed by senior intelligence staff. A confidential annex to the inquiry, held in the Pro under reference ADM/INT/6427, states that Soviet signals intercepts from the night of January 21 included transmissions describing foreign naval divers captured during unauthorized entry into secured military zone. Survivor rumors began circulating in intelligence circles in the early 1950s. A defector from the MGB claimed that 3 British servicemen were held briefly at a facility outside Swinoujsy before being transferred to Kaliningrad. No records confirming their identities have been found. Interest in the case revived in 1979 when a former Polish naval engineer, working under the pseudonym Ladek, contacted a BBC investigative program with details of an underground complex beneath Gdynia, formerly Gotenhafen, extending several hundred meters inland from the waterfront. He claimed the complex included a reinforced tunnel leading to a submerged dock capable of housing a U-boat. Ladek alleged that the facility had been sealed by Soviet engineers in 1947 and flooded, with entrances bricked over. Attempts to verify his account ran into immediate obstacles. Port Authority archives from the immediate post-war period were misplaced during a 1981 audit. Satellite imagery of the site was restricted under NATO intelligence sharing protocols. In 1989, following the political upheavals in Eastern Europe, the British Ministry of Defence submitted a formal request to the Polish government for access to the Gdynia Naval District. The request was denied. 2 years later, a MOD archivist, reviewing the declassification schedule for Baltic operations, flagged the Kestrel file for release. Within a month, the file was reclassified at the highest security level, citing ongoing operational relevance. The Kestrel's final resting place is unknown. The official record lists her as scrapped 1946, though no shipyard receipts or dismantling photographs have surfaced. Naval historians note that this categorization is often used as a placeholder for vessels transferred to foreign powers or retained for clandestine purposes. The mystery of Projekt Sturmlicht remains unresolved. The surviving intercepts suggest that the program involved long-range atmospheric channeling, a term not found in other wartime German technical documentation. Without the missing pages of the Kestrel's logbook or testimony from her crew, the events of January 21, 1946 can only be reconstructed in fragments, each pointing toward a post-war operation that brushed too close to whatever remained hidden beneath the Baltic. In the official Royal Navy casualty list, the names of HMS Kestrel's crew appear without annotation. Families received standard notifications, their pensions processed as for wartime losses. No memorial service was held. The last known personal artifact, a brass compass engraved with Commander Weatherby's initials, sits locked in a MOD storage facility in Portsmouth, item number INV/NR/4583. Its bearing needle is frozen, perpetually pointing east. On June 4, 1952, at 23:40 hours, 3 men boarded a C-54 Skymaster at Wiesbaden Air Base under the cover of a weather reconnaissance flight. Their official manifest listed them as technical observers attached to the U.S. Army Signal Corps, but the paperwork was a forgery. The reality, buried in a sealed Office of Special Investigations file for decades, was that they were the insertion team for Operation Silver Halo, a classified mission authorized jointly by the CIA and U.S. Air Force intelligence. The objective: infiltrate Soviet-occupied East Prussia and locate Archivstelle Wolfen, a hardened Luftwaffe records repository near the ruins of Königsberg, believed to contain documentation on advanced German weapons research. Specific intelligence pointed to testing data from the Kurisch Narung, a thin spit of land stretching 60 miles into the Baltic, where, in late 1944, German engineers had reportedly conducted live trials of unconventional ordnance. The team was codenamed Harrier. A Major Thomas R. Keating, USAF intelligence, veteran of post-war Berlin Air Corridor operations. A Sergeant First Class Daniel Vogel, German-born OSS liaison fluent in Russian and East Prussian dialects. A Lieutenant Robert Hale, U.S. Navy demolitions specialist with experience in penetrating fortified U-boat pens. Their infiltration route was planned to avoid Soviet patrol patterns, a low-altitude night drop by parachute into the forests south of Insterburg, followed by a 28-kilometer foot movement to the suspected archive site. Aerial reconnaissance photographs taken by modified RB-45 Tornadoes showed a bunker complex partially camouflaged under collapsed masonry, with a single rail spur leading toward Kaliningrad. According to the mission log, preserved only in fragments, the C-54 departed Wiesbaden at 2340, made a refueling stop at RAF Gütersloh, and then flew northeast over the Baltic, skirting radar coverage by hugging low cloud cover. At 3:12 hours, the drop was executed without reported incident. Contact was maintained via short-burst HF radio, encrypted using the AN/PRC6 set with one-time pad keys. At 7:45 hours on June 5, Harrier transmitted their first sitrep, LZ clear. Movement east. No contact. The second transmission, received at 14:10 hours, was more cryptic. Wolfen perimeter intact. Entrance secured. Signs of recent activity. Analysts later debated whether recent activity referred to Soviet presence or something else. The final transmission came at 2:14 hours on June 6. Recorded in the mission's comment file, it reads, "Package located. Contact compromised. Extraction priority 1." The line cut abruptly, followed by a burst of static. No distress code was sent. U.S. forces in West Germany requested immediate clearance to mount a recovery operation, but the State Department refused, citing unacceptable risk of international incident. Within 72 hours, Soviet TASS bulletins began reporting armed American provocateurs apprehended inside Kaliningrad Oblast. No names were given, and the U.S. publicly denied the incident occurred. Years later, a defected GRU officer provided details to West German intelligence, claiming that 3 Americans had been captured near Wolfen after triggering a perimeter alarm. They were allegedly transported to a secure facility in Minsk for interrogation and then transferred east in late 1953. No prisoner exchange records match their descriptions. The existence of Archivstelle Wolfen was corroborated indirectly in 1968 when a declassified Luftwaffe logistics ledger surfaced in Munich, bearing Wolfen's depot code and listing Nerung prototypes, final series, among its last entries dated February 1945. The notation was in the handwriting of Oberst Hans Ulrich Stegmann, who had overseen experimental weapons shipments in East Prussia before disappearing during the Soviet advance. Survivors of the Königsberg siege later spoke of convoys moving under guard toward the Nerung, often at night, carrying large cylindrical containers. Local fishermen reported hearing deep, concussive detonations from the peninsula in March 1945, unlike any artillery they had encountered. A CIA archival review in 1975 found an internal memorandum marked Eyes Only, referencing unresolved Wolfen file, materials possibly integrated into Soviet research, strategic implications high. The memo was initialed by then Deputy Director of Operations William Colby. Within weeks of its discovery, the Wolfen dossier was removed from the open review process and reclassified indefinitely. By the late 1980s, as Soviet control over Eastern Europe began to falter, Western journalists attempted to locate the Wolfen site. A 1989 German television crew traveling under a cultural visa claimed to have identified the ruins of a bunker complex matching wartime aerial photographs. The site was heavily overgrown, with collapsed entrances and rusted rail fragments protruding from the underbrush. Before the crew could film extensively, they were approached by armed border troops and ordered to leave, their footage confiscated. When Kaliningrad archives briefly opened to researchers in 1992, the Wolfen file was conspicuously absent. Requests to access wartime engineering records for the Nerung were denied, due to loss or destruction. Former Soviet military engineers interviewed in Vilnius suggested the site had been neutralized in 1947 after a series of unexplained accidents involving stored munitions. One retired colonel described Wolfen as a place where even the NKVD would not linger. Today, all that remains of Operation Silver Halo in the public record are 3 personnel files, each ending abruptly in June 1952, stamped with the same notation: status, missing, presumed deceased. Cause, classified. Family members received no remains, only folded flags and letters signed by officers who could not reveal what happened. The Kurish Nerung itself remains a restricted area in parts, with large tracts still under military jurisdiction. Satellite imagery shows irregular depressions and scorched vegetation patterns along its central spine. Whether these mark the remnants of German tests, Soviet demolition efforts, or something more obscure is unknown. The last unredacted line in the surviving Silver Halo communications log is a penciled annotation by an unidentified signals officer. Wolfen, confirmed entry, no confirmed exit. On the night of October 10, 1944, U-977, a Type WWII U-boat under the command of Oberleutnant Heinz Schaefer, broke standard radio silence protocols to transmit a brief, encrypted signal on frequency band 17.4 MHz. The intercept, partially decoded by Allied WWII service stations, contained two words that have remained the subject of speculation for decades: Valkyrie delivered. The message originated far south of the U-boat's expected operational zone, nearly 1,000 nautical miles off the coast of West Africa, deep in the South Atlantic. Allied analysts at the time logged it as a probable disinformation transmission, but the file was marked for follow-up. The unusual aspect was not merely the message content, but its timing. The Kriegsmarine was already in defensive retreat, and U-977 was supposed to be operating in the North Atlantic convoy lanes. Peenemünde Test Stand 7, the Luftwaffe and Kriegsmarine's primary rocket development facility, had been struck heavily in 1943, but intelligence sources reported that experimental high-energy devices, possibly related to pulse detonation or directed energy weapon concepts, were still being fabricated in limited quantities through 1944. By September, a large shipment was rumored to have been prepared for evacuation to a secure location beyond Allied reach. The British Naval Intelligence Division, NID, connected Valkyrie to a series of earlier intercepts mentioning Gerät 44, a project name not appearing in any captured German technical archives. The working theory was that Valkyrie was either the final prototype or a set of critical components from the device, removed from Peenemünde and placed aboard a transport route designed to avoid interception. Post-war records claim U-977 departed Kristiansand, Norway, on May 2, 1945, after Hitler's death, and proceeded on a 66-day voyage to Argentina, surrendering at Mar del Plata on August 17, 1945. Schaefer's memoir insists the voyage was a prolonged underwater transit to avoid surrender to Soviet forces, with no stops or special cargo. However, discrepancies emerge when cross-referencing port entry logs with Allied submarine tracking data. One such log from Sierra Leone, dated October 14, 1944, records a British corvette detecting a large sonar contact in the same grid sector where the Valkyrie transmission was intercepted. In 1989, Argentine archival staff unearthed a partially burned manifest among the seized property files of former naval officers accused of harboring Nazi fugitives. The document, written in German and stamped with the Kriegsmarine eagle, listed Maschinenteil, Hochenergiegerät, machine part, high-energy device, under cargo description. The tonnage entry and consignee details had been scorched away, as if deliberately destroyed. Within hours of the document's discovery, Argentine military police entered the archive, removed the file, and sealed it under national security. A separate, seldom discussed thread involves a 1946 U.S. Army Counterintelligence Corps (CIC) report from Buenos Aires. It records interviews with dockworkers who claimed that, days before U-977's public surrender, a German-speaking crew unloaded several heavy crates onto unmarked trucks in the port district under police escort. The convoy reportedly moved toward a disused warehouse in Bahia Blanca, later demolished in the 1950s. Technical interest in the Valkyrie possibility resurfaced during the 1960s when declassified Soviet naval bulletins revealed that Moscow had requested access to Argentine naval facilities between 1946 and 1948, citing unfinished war materials of strategic importance. The request was refused, but it confirms Soviet awareness of a potentially significant transfer. Even the submarine's voyage timeline contains unresolved anomalies. Schaefer's official account describes traveling submerged for 66 days using a snorkel mast. However, Kriegsmarine engineering logs show that U-977 snorkel had been damaged during an earlier patrol and was awaiting replacement at Kiel, a repair never officially recorded as completed before her departure. This raises the question of whether the extended underwater journey was fabricated to conceal stops en route. Historians investigating the case note the similarity between Valkyrie delivered and a May 1945 intercept from a different U-boat in the South Atlantic, Valkyrie safe. The second message was never connected to a confirmed haul. It is possible these were status updates in a covert transfer route, U-977 being only one leg of a longer chain. The Argentine government has repeatedly denied holding any artifacts or documents connected to U-977 beyond her crew's surrender paperwork. Requests under declassification initiatives in 2005 yielded nothing new, with files labeled as lost during administrative relocation. Former intelligence officials privately suggest these materials remain in a secure defense archive outside Buenos Aires. One tantalizing fragment survives, a faded photograph taken by an Argentine naval photographer on the day of U-977's surrender. In the background, behind the assembled crew, a large crate can be seen being hoisted by a dockside crane, wrapped in tarpaulin, with what appears to be a hazard symbol partially visible beneath the covering. The negative is missing, only a cropped print remains, its edges frayed and caption absent. Whether Valkyrie referred to a specific device, a code name for an intelligence transfer, or a psychological ploy remains unknown. The Piemont connection has never been conclusively proven, and no surviving German engineering staff have admitted to working on a Gerät 44. Yet, the chain of coincidental disappearances, of records, artifacts and individuals, suggests a coordinated effort to bury whatever truth lay behind a single, shortwave message in the South Atlantic. U-977 was eventually scrapped in 1946 after testing at the U.S. Navy Yard in Boston. Her hull yielded nothing of technical significance, at least, nothing that was publicly acknowledged. The CIC's internal evaluation file closes with a brief, typed sentence. Cargo of strategic note presumed offloaded prior to public surrender. Location and nature remain undetermined. In the archive's margin, in blue pencil, an unknown hand added, Valkyrie was never meant to arrive in Germany. On April 27, 1945, as the U.S. 3rd Infantry Division pushed deeper into the collapsing Bavarian heartland, a reconnaissance patrol under Lieutenant Charles H. Madsen was diverted toward the market town of Berchtesgaden. The diversion order, issued from 7th Army Headquarters, was unusually specific: secure Schloss Grünthal intact. Priority cargo extraction. Schloss Grünthal was a 17th-century estate, heavily fortified in recent years and marked on aerial reconnaissance photographs with a peculiar notation, SSAHN/42. The designation linked it to the Ahnenerbe, the SS research institute devoted to pseudo-archaeology, anthropology, and, as later discovered, specialized wartime technology programs. When Madsen's unit arrived at first light on April 28, they found the castle's perimeter guarded by a scattering of Waffen-SS troops, most of whom surrendered without a fight. Inside, the estate's grand hall was lined with steel crates stamped with Reichsadler seals and coded serial numbers beginning with GRT-, a prefix absent from standard Wehrmacht logistic systems. The basement level revealed hidden passages, one of which led to a chamber sealed by a welded steel door. Using demolition charges, engineers breached the door and entered a climate-controlled vault. Inside were 37 cylindrical metal canisters, each approximately 1.2 meters tall, painted matte black and bearing only serial codes. Temperature gauges and what appeared to be pressure regulators were built into their lids. No inventory sheets were found. By midday, several unmarked C-47 Dakota transports arrived at a nearby field, accompanied by personnel in British uniforms bearing no visible rank insignia. Witnesses from the 3rd Infantry recall that these men took command of the canisters without presenting formal orders, loading them onto the Dakotas with extreme caution. Armed guards maintained a cordon until the aircraft departed, reportedly bound for RAF Buttonwood in Lancashire. Officially, the captured material from Grünthal was recorded as miscellaneous archival property in the U.S. Army's seizure reports. The canisters themselves were omitted from the final inventory. Weeks later, a brief entry in a British Ministry of Defense ledger referred to Grünthal Consignment, classified, filed under Cold War Strategic Reserves. In 1971, during an internal mod review, the Grünthal Consignment was mentioned again, this time in connection with sensitive energy research. Within 48 hours, the review's working documents were reclassified at the highest level and removed from circulation. The only surviving note from that review, handwritten in the margin of a logistics sheet, reads, "Not for NATO disclosure." Scholars piecing together the estate's history discovered that Schloss Grünthal had been requisitioned by the SS Annenberg in late 1943, ostensibly for the storage of cultural artifacts. However, construction records from a Munich contractor show that extensive subterranean modifications were made, including reinforced chambers, industrial ventilation systems, and high-capacity electrical wiring, features more consistent with laboratory or containment facilities than with archives. In 1993, a retired British RAF loadmaster named Harold Dyer gave an interview to a small military history magazine, claiming he had been one of the crew on the April 1945 flights from Grünthal. He described the cargo as sealed, heavy as sin, and treated like we were carrying live ordnance. Dyer recalled that the pilots were instructed to avoid turbulence and land only after clearance from Whitehall direct. The fate of the canisters after Buttonwood remains unknown. The airbase was a major maintenance and supply depot during the war, but also hosted classified storage facilities jointly operated with the United States. Decommissioning records from the 1960s contain multiple unexplained gaps in the property logs for certain secure hangars. The castle itself was abandoned after the war and fell into disrepair. Local residents claimed that for months after the Americans left, strange chemical odors seeped from the lower levels. In 1947, the Bavarian government sealed the underground sections with concrete. No official survey of the site's deeper tunnels has been conducted. Archival researchers have noted that the mod's Grünthal file shares cross-references with unrelated Cold War projects involving energy generation and containment. The specific codes used, particularly ECR7, match those found in declassified memos discussing experimental power sources tested at remote facilities in Scotland during the 1950s. Whether the Grünthal canisters were directly involved remains speculative. A 2008 Freedom of Information request regarding Grünthal Consignment returned a standard neither confirm nor deny response, citing exemptions for defense and international relations. By then, RAF Buttonwood had been reduced to a historical site, with most wartime structures demolished or repurposed. Former base personnel contacted by researchers either refused to discuss the matter or claimed no knowledge of the consignment. The last concrete sighting of the canisters comes from a faded photograph in a private U.S. Army collection, taken by a 3rd Infantry Corporal in April 1945. It shows 3 of the matte black cylinders being rolled up a loading ramp, guarded by a man in British battle dress whose face is obscured. The edges of the photograph are torn, and the original negative is missing. Schloss Grünthal still stands, its upper floors restored for tourism, but the sealed lower chambers remain off-limits under state heritage law. The official reason is structural instability, though locals insist the real reason is buried deeper, behind concrete walls poured in the first uneasy years of the Cold War. In late March 1964, an archivist at the Polish Central Committee headquarters in Warsaw uncovered a dust-covered wooden crate mislabeled as Administrative Correspondence, 1951. Inside were brittle manila folders, carbon copies of Wehrmacht orders, and a series of aerial reconnaissance photographs taken in the final weeks of World War II. The contents were stamped Operation Zmierzch, Dusk. The files described a sudden and catastrophic detonation in the Sudeten Mountains on May 5, 1945, only 3 days before Germany's unconditional surrender. According to intercepted German signals, the blast originated in a remote valley near the village of Kopanina, then under German control. Wehrmacht engineering units, referenced as Pioneer Battalion 31, had been stationed there since January 1945. Their orders, signed by General Erich von Hartmann, authorized final measures to be carried out in the event of imminent capture by Soviet forces. The photographs, shot from a Luftwaffe Focke-Wulf 189 reconnaissance aircraft, showed a perfectly circular zone of destruction approximately 400 meters in diameter. The trees surrounding the blast area were flattened radially, their trunks splintered but not burned in the manner of conventional incendiary strikes. In the center of the zone, the earth appeared vitrified, with a pale, glassy sheen. Also in the crate was a decrypted Soviet field report from May 9, 1945. Written in clipped, bureaucratic Russian, it described extreme thermal effects inconsistent with known munitions, and ordered the immediate quarantine of the site. The The zone was cordoned off by NKVD troops, and access was limited to a small cadre of Soviet military engineers. The report's final line instructed, all materials classified. Location to be removed from all official cartography. Polish military geologists, working under Soviet supervision in June 1945, conducted limited soil and rock sampling. Their findings, preserved in a separate folder, noted the presence of fused quartz layers and subsurface magnetic anomalies. The report recommended further study, but the conclusion page was missing. In its place was a typed slip reading, "Anomaly resolved. No further inquiry." For nearly 2 decades, the Kopanina blast zone was absent from any publicly available maps. The valley was officially designated as forest reserve land, patrolled by border guards despite being far from the frontier. Locals whispered about nighttime activity, convoys of trucks entering the restricted area, low-frequency hums that could be felt through the ground, and occasional bursts of bright light from behind the ridgeline. In 1972, a team of Czechoslovak geologists, operating under the pretext of forestry surveys, attempted to reach the site. They were intercepted by armed personnel in unmarked uniforms and escorted out. Their confiscated notebooks were returned 2 weeks later, but all sketches of the valley had been ripped out. Interest in the event briefly resurfaced in 1987 when a retired Polish army captain, Józef Markowski, published a memoir containing a vague reference to the mountain that glowed. Markowski claimed to have been stationed in the Sudeten region during the war's final days and recalled being ordered to assist in transporting sealed metal containers from a bunker near Kopanina. Hours later, he saw a blinding flash over the mountains and felt a shockwave strong enough to knock him from his feet, despite being more than 10 kilometers away. When questioned by journalists, Markowski said the containers were marked with a double lightning bolt symbol over the letter H, a marking not found in standard German ordnance catalogs. He believed the detonation was deliberate, intended to destroy whatever was inside the bunker before Soviet capture. In the 1990s, as Cold War secrecy began to erode, researchers sought access to regional archives for Kopanina and surrounding districts. Multiple requests to the Polish Ministry of Defense were denied. A 1994 internal memo, later leaked, stated, "Operation Zmierzch remains classified due to ongoing strategic considerations." The phrasing was unusual, given that the event had occurred half a century earlier. Satellite imagery available in the early 2000s revealed that the valley remained devoid of vegetation, the scar visible as an unnatural, pale ring amid dense forest. Attempts to conduct ground surveys were met with bureaucratic delays and sudden revocations of permits. Local police claimed the area was unsafe due to unexploded ordnance, though no formal clearance operations have been recorded. In 2011, a private researcher from Wrocław obtained high-resolution scans of 2 aerial photographs from the original Zmierzch file. The images, when enhanced, showed not only the central vitrified area but also faint geometric impressions in the surrounding soil, rectilinear patterns suggestive of buried structures. The researchers' findings were published online, but the images were removed within days following a takedown request citing national security. The original crate, discovered in 1964, has since vanished from the Central Committee archives. The last known inventory entry for its contents is dated 1967, marked "Transferred to Secure Storage, Warsaw." No corresponding receipt exists. To this day, the Kopanina blast zone remains fenced off, its perimeter patrolled sporadically. Unmarked surveillance cameras dot the treeline. Officially, it is environmentally protected terrain, closed to public entry. Unofficially, it is the epicenter of one of the most tightly sealed wartime mysteries in Eastern Europe, an anomaly erased from maps but not from memory, waiting in silence beneath the Sudeten soil. The paper burns, the photographs fade, and the voices are silenced, but the ground remembers. Somewhere, beyond the fences and the lies, metal still sleeps under soil, humming with secrets no government will admit exist. Those who touched them are gone, yet their absence lingers like static in the air, daring anyone reckless enough to follow the path they took, knowing it never leads back.